The check cleared on a Tuesday morning while Marcus Henley was probably sipping his third espresso and explaining to another board member why innovation takes time. $47 million transferred to my business account in 3 separate wires, each one representing a major client who had decided they preferred working with someone who actually listened to their ideas instead of laughing at them in conference rooms filled with expensive suits and cheaper thinking. I stared at the banking app on my phone, watching those numbers settle into reality, and remembered the exact moment 6 months ago when Marcus stood behind his mahogany podium, gestured toward my presentation like it was contaminated, and said with that practiced CEO chuckle, "Well, that's certainly creative thinking. But let's focus on realistic solutions that actually work in the real world." 23 executives nodded along like synchronized swimmers, afraid to disagree with the man who controlled their bonuses, while I sat there absorbing the public humiliation of having my 18 months of research dismissed as fantasy by someone who hadn't read past the cover page. What Marcus didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had stopped caring about their approval weeks earlier. I wasn't presenting my ideas hoping they'd implement them. I was presenting them to confirm what I already suspected, that this company was run by people who confused tradition with intelligence and mistook ego for expertise. Before I tell you exactly how watching their stock price plummet became the most satisfying financial news I've ever received, could you hit that subscribe button and give this video a like? Because what I'm about to share will show you how one moment of public mockery can backfire in ways that seem impossible until they happen to the people who deserve it most. And trust me, you need to hear every detail of how this unfolded. Let me take you back to where this really started, because the best revenge stories always begin long before anyone realizes they're creating their own destruction. 18 months ago, I was Director of Strategic Innovation at Henley Dynamics, which sounds impressive until you realize that strategic innovation at that company meant repackaging existing products with slightly different marketing and calling it breakthrough thinking. I had joined because their recruitment pitch talked about disrupting industries and pioneering solutions that would define the next decade. What I found instead was a culture where new ideas went to die in committee meetings run by people who had built their careers on playing it safe and avoiding any decision that couldn't be traced back to someone else's successful precedent. My first red flag should have been the onboarding process. Instead of discussing vision or strategy, my supervisor, Karen Whitfield, spent 3 hours explaining the proper format for expense reports and the importance of using company-approved fonts in presentations. When I asked about the innovation budget, she blinked like I had inquired about launching rockets from the parking lot. "We prefer evolutionary improvements over revolutionary changes," she said, which I would later understand was corporate speak for, "We're terrified of anything we can't copy from competitors who figured it out first." The company culture was suffocating in its mediocrity. Weekly innovation meetings where the most radical suggestion involved changing the color scheme on client dashboards. Budget allocation sessions where any project requiring more than 6 months was automatically classified as too risky. Performance reviews that rewarded conformity and punished creative thinking through subtle comments about being a team player and understanding company priorities. I watched brilliant engineers reduce themselves to making minor tweaks to systems that desperately needed complete overhauls. I saw marketing teams pitch the same recycled campaigns with different stock photos and call it fresh thinking. I witnessed department heads shoot down promising research because it might threaten the comfortable predictability of quarterly earnings reports that met expectations without ever exceeding them. But I kept my head down and started working on what would eventually become the foundation of everything Marcus would mock and everything that would destroy his comfortable little kingdom. The project started innocently enough. Henley Dynamics provided logistics software for mid-sized manufacturing companies. The kind of boring but essential infrastructure that keeps supply chains running smoothly, while executives focus on sexier initiatives. Our clients were hemorrhaging money due to inefficient inventory tracking, delayed shipment coordination, and communication breakdowns between suppliers and distributors. Standard stuff that our existing software addressed with all the innovation of a calculator from 1987. Our software was functional but embarrassingly outdated. Clients had to manually enter data that should have been automatically imported. Reports required 3 different applications and took hours to generate information that should have been available in real time. Mobile access was non-existent, meaning plant managers couldn't make critical decisions unless they were physically sitting at their desktop computers. Integration with modern e-commerce platforms required expensive custom programming that often broke during routine updates. The user interface looked like it was designed by someone who thought the internet was still experimental technology. I spent weeks interviewing clients, not just the executives who signed contracts, but the actual people using our systems daily. Plant managers, inventory specialists, shipping coordinators, the folks who knew exactly where every breakdown occurred and how much those breakdowns cost. What I discovered was that our software solved problems from 1995, while our clients were dealing with challenges from 2024. E-commerce integration, real-time data analytics, predictive maintenance algorithms, automated vendor communication, mobile accessibility, cloud-based collaboration tools, all things our competition was implementing while we were still charging premium prices for systems that required manual data entry and generated reports that looked like they were designed by someone who thought color printing was still experimental technology. The more I learned about client frustrations, the clearer it became that Henley Dynamics was living on borrowed time. Our reputation protected us temporarily, but reputation doesn't compensate for inferior technology forever. Clients were already exploring alternatives, testing competitor platforms, and building internal business cases for switching providers. The exodus hadn't started yet, but the foundation was crumbling. Meanwhile, Marcus spent board meetings discussing brand strategy and market positioning as if superior marketing could overcome fundamental product limitations. Karen focused on process improvements and efficiency metrics that optimized outdated workflows instead of replacing them with modern alternatives. The development team received orders to prioritize bug fixes and minor enhancements over transformational upgrades that might disrupt their comfortable maintenance routines. I started building something different. Not an incremental improvement, but a complete reimagining of how logistics software could work if you designed it for the world that actually existed, instead of the world that baby boomers remembered fondly. Machine learning algorithms that could predict inventory needs based on seasonal patterns, supply chain disruptions, and market trends. Real-time integration with shipping carriers, customs systems, and financial platforms. Mobile interfaces that let plant managers make critical decisions from anywhere. Automated supplier communication that reduced human error and eliminated the endless email chains that turned simple problems into week-long disasters. The platform I was developing would solve problems clients didn't even know they had. Predictive analytics that could identify potential supply chain bottlenecks weeks before they occurred. Automated reordering systems that adjusted inventory levels based on demand forecasting and seasonal variables. Integration with accounting software that eliminated manual invoice processing and reduced billing errors by 90%. Real-time dashboard that provided instant visibility into operations across multiple facilities, suppliers, and distribution channels. Mobile applications that functioned as complete command centers, allowing executives to monitor and manage their entire logistics network from anywhere in the world. I worked nights and weekends, not because Karen asked me to, but because I could see exactly how this would transform our clients' operations and create competitive advantages that would make switching to alternatives unthinkable. The more I developed, the more excited I became about presenting this to leadership. I imagined Marcus's reaction when I showed him how we could dominate the logistics software market for the next decade while our competitors scrambled to catch up. The financial projections were staggering. Conservative estimates showed this platform could triple our annual revenue within 3 years while reducing operational costs and creating client loyalty that would make us irreplaceable. More aggressive scenarios suggested we could capture 40% market share and establish pricing power that would generate profit margins our competitors couldn't match. The competitive analysis was equally compelling. While we were debating font choices and report formatting, our primary competitors were investing heavily in exactly the kind of innovation I was proposing. We had maybe 18 months before they launched comprehensive platforms that would make our current offerings look embarrassingly primitive. This wasn't just an opportunity for growth, it was a requirement for survival. I scheduled the presentation for a Thursday morning in November. The boardroom was packed with senior executives, department heads, and Marcus himself, sitting at the head of the table like a king holding court. I had prepared for weeks, created detailed financial projections, cost-benefit analyses, implementation timelines, and competitive comparisons that proved this wasn't just innovative thinking. It was strategic necessity. Our biggest competitors were already developing similar solutions. We had maybe 18 months before they launched and captured market share we would never recover. I started with the problems: clear, documented inefficiencies costing our clients millions annually, industry trends showing rapid adoption of integrated analytics and automation, competitive intelligence revealing that our primary rivals were already beta testing next-generation platforms, client feedback indicating growing frustration with our current limitations and increasing interest in alternative solutions, market research showing that logistics software buyers were prioritizing innovation and integration over brand recognition and historical relationships. Then I showed them the solution: elegant, comprehensive, profitable, and achievable with our existing resources and expertise. The technical architecture was sound, built on proven technologies and industry-standard protocols. The user experience was intuitive, designed based on extensive client interviews and usability testing. The financial model was conservative but compelling, showing clear paths to profitability and sustainable competitive advantages. The implementation plan was realistic, with defined milestones, resource requirements, and risk mitigation strategies. The financial projections were conservative but staggering. Within 3 years, this platform could triple our annual revenue while reducing operational costs and creating client loyalty that would make us irreplaceable. Conservative estimates showed return on investment exceeding 400% within 5 years. Aggressive but achievable scenarios suggested we could capture dominant market share and establish pricing power that would generate profit margins our competitors couldn't match. I finished the presentation and looked around the room, expecting questions about implementation, budget allocation, or timeline details. Instead, I got silence. The kind of silence that feels like everyone is waiting for someone else to speak first, afraid to reveal their ignorance or challenge authority without understanding the political implications. Marcus leaned back in his chair, that practiced executive posture that says he's thinking deep thoughts while actually calculating how to respond without revealing he wasn't paying attention. His fingers drummed against the mahogany table, his eyes scanning the room to gauge reactions before committing to his own opinion. He was performing leadership rather than exercising it, more concerned with maintaining his image than evaluating the substance of what I had presented. Then he started laughing. Not a surprised laugh or an impressed laugh, but the condescending chuckle of someone who thinks they're dealing with a child who doesn't understand how the adult world works. The sound filled the boardroom like smoke, suffocating any possibility of serious discussion or thoughtful analysis. "Well," he said, looking around the room to make sure everyone was watching his performance, "that's certainly creative thinking. Very ambitious. Very elaborate." He paused for effect, enjoying the attention and the deference of executives who wouldn't dare disagree with him publicly. But let's focus on realistic solutions that actually work in the real world, instead of fantasy projects that sound impressive in presentations, but fall apart when you try to implement them with actual clients who have actual budgets and actual deadlines. The room nodded along. Every single executive sat there nodding, like Marcus had just delivered profound wisdom instead of dismissing 18 months of research without addressing a single specific point. Karen smiled like she was proud of her boss for maintaining such high standards while protecting the company from reckless spending on unproven technologies. The CFO, David Chen, actually took notes as if Marcus's vague dismissal contained actionable insights worth documenting for future reference. The VP of Sales, Jennifer Walsh, glanced at her phone like this conversation was already over and she had more important meetings to attend. I felt heat crawling up my neck, but I kept my voice steady. "What specific concerns do you have about the implementation strategy or financial projections?" I asked, hoping to force him into substantive discussion rather than allowing him to dismiss everything with executive pronouncements that sounded authoritative but contained no actual analysis. Marcus waved his hand like I was asking irrelevant questions that missed the point entirely. It's not about specifics. It's about understanding our clients and our market position. We're successful because we provide reliable solutions that work consistently. Our clients don't want experimental technology. They want proven systems they can depend on. His response revealed everything I needed to know about why Henley Dynamics was slowly dying. He was making strategic decisions based on assumptions rather than data, protecting his comfort zone rather than addressing market realities, and confusing risk aversion with prudent leadership. But our client interviews show they're specifically asking for these capabilities, I replied, pulling out documentation I had prepared for exactly this objection. They're frustrated with our current limitations and considering alternatives that offer integrated analytics and automation. Morrison Manufacturing alone is spending an additional $200,000 annually on third-party solutions because our platform can't provide the functionality they need. Marcus's expression shifted slightly, like I had just challenged his authority in front of people who mattered. His jaw tightened, his shoulders squared, and his voice took on the edge that executives use when they want to end discussions without appearing unreasonable. I think you'll find that what clients say they want and what they actually need are often very different things. That's why we have leadership experience to make strategic decisions based on market realities rather than wishful thinking. David Chin nodded vigorously, as if this empty platitude contained profound insights about business strategy. Jennifer Walsh looked up from her phone long enough to murmur agreement about the importance of proven leadership in uncertain markets. Karen beamed like a proud parent watching her child perform in a school play. The entire room was participating in a collective delusion that Marcus's dismissal was based on wisdom rather than fear. I realized in that moment that this wasn't a discussion about innovation or strategy. It was a performance designed to protect Marcus's authority and everyone else's comfort with the status quo. They didn't want to evaluate my proposal because evaluation might require them to acknowledge that their current approach was failing. They preferred the comfortable predictability of gradual decline over the uncertain requirements of transformational change. The meeting ended with Marcus assigning the Innovation Initiative to a committee that would evaluate realistic improvements to our existing platforms. Translation: bury the project in bureaucratic purgatory while everyone pretends to take innovation seriously. The committee would meet monthly, generate reports about incremental enhancements, and ensure that nothing substantive ever emerged from the process. It was corporate theater designed to create the appearance of progress while guaranteeing that no actual progress would occur. I walked back to my office feeling like I had just watched a demonstration of everything wrong with corporate leadership. Marcus hadn't engaged with a single technical detail, hadn't questioned any financial assumption, hadn't asked about competitive threats or client feedback. He had simply decided that anything beyond incremental changes was too risky for his carefully managed reputation. He was leading through fear rather than vision, protecting the past rather than building the future, and confusing caution with competence. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to waste any more time trying to convince people who were incapable of recognizing opportunity when it was handed to them with detailed instructions and financial projections. I was going to build it myself. Not the platform. I already had the platform 90% complete. I was going to build the company that would make Marcus's comfortable little world very, very uncomfortable. I started that evening. Company registration, business banking, legal consultation, and one phone call that would prove more important than anything I had ever done in Marcus's boardroom. I called Elena Vasquez, the plant manager at Morrison Manufacturing, one of our biggest clients and one of the people I had interviewed most extensively during my research. She had been particularly vocal about the limitations of our current system and the additional costs her company was incurring to work around those limitations. Elena, I said, hypothetically, if someone offered you logistics software that could cut your inventory costs by 30% while improving delivery accuracy and providing real-time analytics, would Morrison be interested in piloting that system? There was a pause, then laughter, but not the condescending kind. the relieved laughter of someone who had been waiting for this conversation without knowing it was coming. "Hypothetically," she said, "I would be very interested. Our current system feels like it was designed for a different century. When you say hypothetically, how hypothetical are we talking?" "Not very," I replied. "Give me 6 weeks." I hung up and stared at my laptop screen where my presentation from that morning was still open. Marcus thought he was protecting his company from risky innovation. What he had actually done was hand me a detailed roadmap for destroying his market position, while his competition evolved and his clients grew increasingly frustrated with systems that solved yesterday's problems with yesterday's technology. The beautiful part was that I didn't need to steal anything. I didn't need proprietary information or client lists or trade secrets. I just needed to build what Marcus was too scared to build and offer it to clients who were already telling us they needed exactly what I was offering. Marcus had spent that morning laughing at ideas that would define the next generation of logistics software. By evening, I was building the company that would prove him wrong in the most expensive way possible. The next 6 weeks were a blur of 18-hour days, legal paperwork, technical development, and strategic planning. I incorporated under the name Quantum Logistics Solutions, opened business accounts, established vendor relationships, and finalized the platform development that I had been working on for months. The timing was perfect because I had been building this system anticipating resistance from Henley Dynamics leadership. I already knew they would reject innovation, so I had prepared for independence. The platform was more sophisticated than anything currently available in the logistics software market. Machine learning algorithms that could predict demand fluctuations based on historical patterns, seasonal variables, economic indicators, and supply chain disruptions. Automated inventory management that adjusted stock levels in real time based on sales velocity, lead times, and carrying costs. Integrated financial reporting that eliminated manual data entry and provided instant visibility into profitability across product lines, suppliers, and distribution channels. Mobile command center functionality that allowed executives to monitor and manage operations from anywhere in the world. Real-time collaboration tools that streamlined communication between manufacturers, suppliers, distributors, and retail partners. Elena signed the pilot contract on a Tuesday afternoon in January. Morrison Manufacturing would test my platform for 90 days, running it parallel to their existing Henley Dynamics system to compare functionality, efficiency, and cost savings. If the results matched my projections, Morrison would switch entirely and serve as a reference client for future sales efforts. The pilot results exceeded every projection I had made. Morrison's inventory costs dropped 34% in the first month. Order accuracy improved from 87% to 99.6%. Processing time for routine transactions decreased by 60%. Real-time analytics identified 3 supplier reliability issues that would have cost Morrison over $100,000 if left unaddressed. Mobile access allowed Elena to resolve critical problems during a business trip that would have normally required delaying decisions until she returned to the office. 4 months after the pilot began, Morrison Manufacturing became my first full client, canceling their Henley Dynamics contract to work exclusively with my platform. The contract was worth $300,000 annually, more than Morrison had been paying Henley Dynamics for inferior functionality. Elena also agreed to serve as a reference client and participate in case studies that would demonstrate the platform's capabilities to prospective customers. Marcus probably didn't notice at first. One client leaving could be explained by budget constraints, management changes, or any number of routine business fluctuations that affected every software company. Morrison hadn't been Henley Dynamics' largest account, and client turnover was normal in competitive markets. Besides, Marcus was focused on defending the status quo rather than investigating anomalies that might suggest problems with his strategic approach. But Elena had friends. Other plant managers, operations directors, supply chain executives who had been dealing with the same frustrations, the same limitations, the same expensive inefficiencies that Marcus's dinosaur systems couldn't address. She started mentioning my platform during industry conferences, informal networking events, and professional association meetings. She shared specific examples of cost savings, efficiency improvements, and operational advantages that couldn't be achieved with traditional logistics software, Word travels fast in industries where everyone knows everyone, and improvements that save serious money become legends worth sharing. They started calling me, not because I was recruiting them, but because Elena's results were impossible to ignore, and other companies wanted similar advantages. Precision Manufacturing called first, asking about a pilot program after their operations director heard Elena's presentation at a regional manufacturing summit. Coastal Distribution called second, frustrated with their current provider's inability to integrate with their e-commerce platform. Advanced Assembly called third, needing predictive analytics to manage seasonal demand fluctuations that their existing software couldn't handle. Within 8 months, I had 17 clients, all former Henley Dynamics customers, all paying premium prices for software that actually solved their problems instead of creating new ones. The contracts totaled over $4.7 million in annual recurring revenue, representing approximately 23% of Henley Dynamics' total client base and 31% of their annual revenue. Marcus started noticing. I heard through industry contacts that he was asking questions, demanding explanations, scheduling emergency meetings with sales teams who couldn't explain why their biggest accounts were switching to some startup company that hadn't existed a year ago. Karen was reportedly conducting exit interviews with former clients, trying to understand their decision-making process and identify service failures that might have contributed to their departures. David Chin was analyzing revenue projections and realizing that client losses were accelerating rather than stabilizing. Jennifer Walsh was discovering that prospective clients were asking detailed questions about features that Henley Dynamics couldn't provide, comparing their offerings to capabilities they had never heard of before. The leadership team that had dismissed my presentation as fantasy thinking was slowly realizing that the fantasy was becoming their competitors' reality, while their own reality was becoming a nightmare of declining market share and frustrated clients who were finding better alternatives. That's when Marcus decided to take it personally. The call came on a Wednesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly projections that showed my revenue growth exceeding every optimistic scenario I had modeled. Marcus's voice was tight with controlled anger, the sound of someone who was used to being in control and didn't appreciate having that control challenged by former employees who were supposed to know their place in the corporate hierarchy. "We need to talk," he said, skipping pleasantries and cutting straight to threats. "There are some concerning ethical issues we need to address regarding your new venture and its relationship to proprietary work you developed while employed at Henley Dynamics." I almost laughed. "What proprietary work would that be, Marcus? The presentation you dismissed as fantasy thinking that would never work in the real world." The irony was too perfect. He was claiming ownership of ideas he had publicly rejected, trying to use legal intimidation to protect intellectual property he had considered worthless when I offered it to him freely. "That's not the point," he snapped, his voice rising with frustration. "You used company resources, company time, and company relationships to develop competitive advantages that rightfully belong to Henley Dynamics. We're prepared to take legal action to protect our intellectual property and client relationships." "Feel free," I replied calmly, enjoying his desperation more than I probably should have. "I'd love to explain to a judge how you're claiming ownership of ideas you publicly mocked as unrealistic. I'm sure that will go well for you." The conversation got uglier from there. Marcus threatened lawsuits, non-compete violations, industrial espionage charges, and professional blacklisting. He accused me of stealing client lists, violating confidentiality agreements, and using insider knowledge to unfairly compete with my former employer. He promised to destroy my reputation, bankrupt my company through legal fees, and ensure that I never worked in the logistics software industry again. He was desperate and angry and making the kind of mistakes that desperate, angry people make when they realize they've been outplayed by someone they underestimated. But I wasn't worried about his threats. I had been careful to avoid any legal vulnerabilities, documenting every step of my development process and ensuring that my platform was built entirely independent of any Henley Dynamics resources or proprietary information. I was worried about his next move because I knew Marcus well enough to know that when legal intimidation failed, he would try something more direct and potentially more damaging. 2 weeks later, he did. I started getting calls from my clients. Polite, concerned calls about rumors they were hearing, questions about my company's financial stability, suggestions that maybe they should reconsider their software choices before committing to long-term contracts with an unproven startup that might not survive the competitive pressures of an established market. The conversations were eerily similar, suggesting coordinated messaging rather than organic concerns. Marcus was calling my clients directly, not their executives. That would have been too obvious and too easy to document. He was calling their procurement managers, their IT directors, their operations supervisors, anyone who had input on software decisions, planting seeds of doubt, sharing concerns about my company's viability, offering special discounts for clients who returned to Henley Dynamics within the next 60 days, suggesting that startup software companies often failed during economic downturns, leaving their clients stranded with unsupported systems and worthless contracts. It was subtle, professional, and completely unethical. Marcus was using his industry relationships and company resources to sabotage my business through whisper campaigns and back-channel manipulation. He was gambling that he could starve my startup before it became too established to kill, and for a few weeks, it looked like his strategy might work. 3 clients postponed contract renewals pending further evaluation of long-term vendor stability. 2 others scheduled meetings to discuss concerns about my platform's support capabilities and disaster recovery procedures. Elena called me directly to ask if there was anything I needed to tell her about my company's financial situation before Morrison made their final commitment to switching platforms entirely. I could have responded with legal action, public accusations, or defensive explanations about my stability and capabilities. Instead, I did something Marcus didn't expect. I accelerated. Instead of trying to reassure existing clients, I focused on acquiring new ones. Instead of defending my platform's capabilities, I demonstrated them through free pilots that let prospective clients see exactly how much money they would save by switching. Instead of arguing about my company's viability, I hired 12 new employees, leased office space in the same building as Marcus's biggest competitor, and announced a partnership with the industry's leading cloud infrastructure provider. I stopped acting like a startup trying to survive and started acting like an established company that was inevitable. The results were spectacular. Within 6 weeks, I had 23 new clients, including 2 Fortune 500 companies that Marcus had been courting for years. My revenue doubled, then tripled. Industry publications started writing articles about my platform, praising its innovation and predicting it would set new standards for logistics software development. TechCrunch featured my company in their emerging technology spotlight. Logistics Tech Weekly published a case study showing how my platform had helped advanced assembly reduce operating costs by 42% while improving customer satisfaction scores. Supply Chain Management Review included my CEO profile in their Disruptors to Watch series, highlighting how my background at Henley Dynamics had prepared me to identify market gaps that established companies were missing. Marcus's whisper campaign backfired completely. Instead of making my company seem unstable, his obvious desperation made Henley Dynamics look threatened and obsolete. Clients started wondering why Marcus was so concerned about one small startup, unless that startup was offering something significantly better than what his company could provide. The more aggressively he attacked my business, the more attention he drew to exactly how much better my platform was than anything he was offering. Prospective clients began asking Henley Dynamics salespeople why their CEO was spending time trying to discredit competitors instead of improving his own products. Existing clients started questioning whether they were missing opportunities by staying with a provider that seemed more focused on protecting market share than advancing technology. Industry analysts began investigating the competitive dynamics, discovering that my platform offered capabilities that Henley Dynamics couldn't match and probably couldn't develop without years of investment and fundamental architecture changes. But the real satisfaction came 6 months later, when Marcus made his final mistake. He tried to buy me out. The offer came through lawyers, dressed up as a strategic partnership opportunity that would allow my platform to reach broader markets through Henley Dynamics' established client relationships and distribution channels. Reading between the legal language, Marcus was offering to acquire my company for $40 million, absorb my technology into his existing systems, and presumably make the problem of my competition disappear permanently while preserving his comfortable market position. $40 million. For ideas he had laughed at as fantasy thinking. For technology he had dismissed as unrealistic. For innovation he had been too scared to pursue when he had the chance. The offer included employment contracts for my key personnel, integration consulting to merge my platform with Henley Dynamics' existing infrastructure, and licensing agreements that would give his company exclusive rights to my proprietary algorithms and analytics capabilities. I considered the offer for exactly 37 seconds, then drafted a reply that I knew would destroy his composure completely. "Thank you for your interest in acquiring our technology platform," I wrote, keeping my tone professionally courteous while delivering maximum psychological impact. "Unfortunately, we're not interested in selling to companies that lack the vision to recognize innovation when it's presented to them. However, we'd be happy to discuss licensing opportunities that would allow Henley Dynamics to integrate limited versions of our capabilities into your existing systems, assuming you can demonstrate that your development team is capable of implementing solutions more sophisticated than basic inventory tracking. Please have your technical team review the attached capability specifications and let us know if you think your infrastructure can support integration with modern software architecture." I attached a technical document that outlined every feature Marcus had dismissed as unrealistic, along with case studies showing exactly how much money my clients were saving compared to what they had been spending on Henley Dynamics' systems. The document was 47 pages of detailed proof that everything he had mocked was not only possible, but profitable, transformational, and increasingly essential for companies that wanted to remain competitive in modern markets. I sent it on a Friday afternoon, knowing Marcus would spend his weekend staring at proof of everything he could have built if he had been capable of recognizing opportunity instead of protecting his ego. His response came Monday morning. 3 sentences of barely controlled rage, formally withdrawing the acquisition offer and threatening to compete aggressively until my company was driven out of business by superior resources and established market relationships. The email was so unprofessional that I forwarded it to Elena, along with a note asking if she thought Marcus sounded like someone who was confident about his company's competitive position. She replied with laughing emojis and a screenshot showing that Morrison Manufacturing had just signed a 5-year exclusive contract with my platform, with options for expansion into 3 additional facilities they were planning to open over the next 18 months. That was the beginning of the end for Marcus's comfortable little kingdom. Over the next year, I watched Henley Dynamics lose client after client to companies offering modern solutions instead of legacy systems with premium pricing. Their stock price dropped 38% as investors realized that the company was losing market share to more innovative competitors. They laid off 200 employees, including Karen, who had spent so much time formatting expense reports and attending committee meetings that she never learned skills relevant to actual innovation. David Chen left for a CFO position at a cryptocurrency startup, claiming he wanted to work in a more dynamic environment with better growth prospects. Jennifer Walsh joined a competitor that offered equity participation and commission structures tied to client satisfaction rather than revenue protection. The entire leadership team that had dismissed my presentation was scattered to different companies or different industries, their careers permanently marked by their association with Henley Dynamics' decline. Marcus held on to his position for another 18 months, long enough to see my company go public with a valuation that made his acquisition offer look like pocket change, long enough to watch me speak at industry conferences about the future of logistics software, while his company was mentioned only as an example of what happens to businesses that refuse to evolve, long enough to realize that the presentation he had mocked in front of 23 executives had become the blueprint for an industry transformation that left his company struggling to remain relevant in markets they had once dominated. The final satisfaction came when I received a LinkedIn message from David Chen, the CFO who had taken notes during Marcus's dismissal of my ideas. He was looking for new opportunities, he said, and wondered if my company had any openings for someone with his financial expertise and experience managing growth-stage technology companies. His message was carefully crafted to suggest that he had always recognized the value of innovation and had been frustrated by Henley Dynamics' conservative approach to strategic development. I replied politely that we were always interested in talented executives, but that our culture prioritized innovation and strategic thinking over traditional approaches to business development. I suggested he might be happier at a company that valued incremental improvements over revolutionary changes, using the exact language Marcus had used to dismiss my presentation 2 years earlier. He never responded. Marcus was eventually replaced by a CEO who understood that the software industry required companies to innovate or die, but by then it was too late. Henley Dynamics had become a cautionary tale about corporate leadership that confused arrogance with expertise and mistook tradition for intelligence. Their new CEO tried implementing the same innovations I had proposed years earlier, but they were too far behind to catch up. My company had captured dominant market share, established client loyalty, and continued developing next-generation capabilities that made even our original platform look primitive by comparison. Meanwhile, my company continued growing, hiring the industry's best talent, and developing capabilities that made our original platform look primitive by comparison. We expanded into predictive analytics that could forecast supply chain disruptions months in advance. We developed artificial intelligence algorithms that optimized routing, pricing, and inventory allocation in real time. We created integrated financial management tools that eliminated manual accounting processes and provided instant visibility into profitability across every aspect of logistics operations. We established partnerships with major cloud providers, shipping carriers, and financial institutions that gave our clients access to services that our competitors couldn't offer. Today, 3 years after Marcus laughed at my ideas in that conference room, my company employs over 400 people and serves logistics needs for some of the world's largest manufacturers. We've expanded into predictive analytics, supply chain optimization, and integrated financial systems that our clients describe as transformational rather than incremental. Our platform processes over $50 billion in annual transaction volume, manages inventory for companies operating in 67 countries, and has eliminated an estimated $200 million in operational inefficiencies that our clients were experiencing with legacy systems. Marcus's old company still exists, providing basic software services to small clients who can't afford modern platforms, but their market share has shrunk to less than 8% of what they controlled when I was sitting in his boardroom listening to him explain why innovation was unrealistic. They've become exactly what I predicted they would become: a legacy provider serving clients who prioritize familiarity over functionality and cost minimization over competitive advantage. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Marcus had actually read my presentation instead of dismissing it. If he had asked thoughtful questions instead of performing condescending expertise for his audience. If he had recognized opportunity instead of protecting his ego. If he had understood that markets reward innovation rather than tradition, and that client loyalty depends on delivering superior value rather than maintaining comfortable relationships. But then I remember that his arrogance and blindness gave me the motivation to build something better than anything he could have imagined, and I realized that his mockery was the best thing that ever happened to my career. His dismissal forced me to become an entrepreneur instead of an employee, to build wealth instead of earning salary, to create solutions instead of requesting permission to innovate. The most elegant revenge isn't destroying someone through elaborate schemes or calculated attacks. It's simply proving them wrong in ways so spectacular that their own words become evidence of their incompetence. Marcus thought he was dismissing unrealistic fantasy when he laughed at my presentation. What he actually did was hand me the blueprint for building a company that would make his dismissal the most expensive mistake of his professional life. And every time I see my company's stock price, every time I read about another major client choosing our platform over traditional alternatives, every time I hear industry experts discussing the innovations that are defining the future of logistics software, I remember exactly how it felt to sit in that conference room while Marcus explained why my ideas would never work in the real world. He was right about one thing, though. They didn't work in his world. They worked in the world that came after his world,